When the Nazis seized power in 1933, they swiftly dismantled the freedoms once enshrined in the German Constitution. By 1934, criticizing the Nazi regime was a crime. Even a whisper against Hitler was treachery. The Nazi ideology was ruthless. It demanded absolute loyalty. Under Hitler, strictness and censorship reigned supreme. But due to the Nazi regime's totalitarian nature, it was long assumed that no records existed to reveal the thoughts and feelings of German generals and their soldiers. These generals and soldiers, who did the fighting and killing, were thought to have left no comparable records. But they did. Hidden away, these records tell a different story. In this climate of fear and control, German generals faced their Allied counterparts. What did they think? What did they fear? Prepare to uncover the hidden truths and secret thoughts of the German High Command. Discover their grudging respect, their underestimations, and their fears. What did they really think of Eisenhower's strategic brilliance, Montgomery's tenacity, and Patton's audacity? Join us as we delve into the minds of the men who stood against the Allies. Expect revelations you thought you knew about the war. The suspense is palpable, the stakes are high, and the truth is more thrilling than fiction. During World War I, a young officer named General Dwight D. Eisenhower faced a significant setback. His request to serve in Europe was denied. Instead, he was assigned to command a unit responsible for training tank crews, a role that would shape his future military career. Eisenhower's expertise in tank warfare grew, and between the wars, he served in various staff positions both in the United States and the Philippines. His strategic mind and leadership skills did not go unnoticed. In the sweltering heat of the Philippines, Eisenhower honed his strategic abilities, preparing for the challenges that lay ahead. By 1941, as the world teetered on the brink of the Second World War, Eisenhower had risen to the rank of brigadier general. His moment of destiny was approaching. With the United States' entry into the global conflict, Eisenhower was promoted and made the supreme commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force, a position with a huge responsibility. Now was the time to test his abilities. Operation Torch. This was the first major Allied offensive in North Africa. Leading this daring mission was General Dwight D. Eisenhower, a name that would soon echo through the halls of history. His goal? To draw Axis forces away from the Eastern Front and relieve the Soviet Union. His task? To coordinate a three-pronged assault on French North Africa. Casablanca, Oran, and Algiers were the targets. His plan? A pincher movement. The stakes? Immense. November 8, 1942, the operation commenced. U.S. troops landed on Morocco's Atlantic coast. Anglo-American forces struck Algeria's Mediterranean shores. A battalion-sized airborne landing near Oran aimed to seize two critical airfields. The resistance was fierce. The Vichy French forces, loyal to Germany, fought back. But Eisenhower's strategy was relentless. His forces pushed through, capturing key positions. By November 10th, all landing objectives had been achieved. Operation Torch was a massive success. It was a turning point in the war. American and British forces had finally seized the offensive after 3 years of Axis dominance. The Allies gained a foothold in North Africa. Eisenhower's reputation grew. He was seen as a rising star in the Allied command. The German generals knew they faced a new kind of leader. They watched with a mix of respect and concern. They saw Eisenhower as a formidable opponent. His ability to coordinate complex operations impressed them. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, acknowledged Eisenhower's strategic mind. The Germans found his diplomacy and military acumen unique. They prepared for the next phase of the conflict, knowing that the American general would be a key player. General Albert Kesselring remembered this operation in these words: "The Americans have a flair for the dramatic. Their Operation Torch was a bold move, catching us off guard and proving their resolve." June 6, 1944. The dawn of D-Day, the largest amphibious invasion in history. Once again, General Eisenhower led the charge. His plan was meticulous. 5 beaches along Normandy coast were the targets: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juneau, and Sword. The plan? Invasion of these beaches by a gigantic military of 150,000 soldiers from the US, Canada, and the UK. The goal? To breach Hitler's Atlantic Wall and liberate Western Europe from the Nazi and fascist occupation. The night before, Eisenhower addressed his troops. His words were resolute. "Your task will not be an easy one. Your enemy is well trained, well equipped, and battle-hardened. He will fight savagely. I have full confidence in your courage, devotion to duty, and skill in battle. We will accept nothing less than full victory. Good luck." The tension was palpable. As dawn broke, the Allies stormed the beaches. The Germans were caught by surprise. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, was away visiting his wife in Germany. The German defenses were in disarray. German generals watched in shock. They had underestimated Eisenhower. His ability to coordinate such a massive operation was unexpected. They saw him as a master strategist. But one German, Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, the Commander-in-Chief West, was critical. He saw Eisenhower's focus on logistics as a weakness, but he couldn't deny the effectiveness of the Allied assault. The beaches were a bloodbath. The Allies faced a fierce resistance, but Eisenhower's resolve never wavered. His leadership was unwavering. The German High Command knew they faced a formidable force. By the end of the day, the Allies had secured a foothold. The cost was high, thousands of lives lost. But the invasion was a success. Eisenhower's reputation soared. He was now a legend. German generals were impressed by the supreme commander of the enemy forces. They often compared his approach to their own commanders, admiring his opportunistic and aggressive tactics, similar to those of leaders like Rommel and Guderian. But was his leadership liked by all? The answer is no. Many, including German generals, blamed Eisenhower for prolonging the war. Let's see why. In 1944, Eisenhower chose to advance into Germany on a broad front, stretching from the North Sea to Switzerland. This decision went against the advice of his key subordinates, including George S. Patton and Field Marshal Sir Bernard Montgomery. They are discussed in this video. They favored competing advances on narrow fronts. But why so? The broad front intended to maintain pressure on the German forces across multiple points, preventing them from concentrating their defenses. But this had higher costs and lower benefits. The broad front required extensive supply lines, which were difficult to maintain and protect. This slowed the overall advance. Also, by spreading the Allied forces thinly across a wide area, it reduced the concentration of troops and firepower at any single point, making it harder to achieve decisive breakthroughs. German generals viewed it as overly cautious and methodical. They thought this was a poor decision, as war could be won quickly by the Americans if they had invaded on a narrow front. This, they thought, would have allowed the Allies to exploit opportunities for rapid breakthroughs, as advised by other American generals. Chester Wilmot, an Australian war correspondent, went so far as to write in his book, The Struggle for Europe, that Eisenhower prevented General Montgomery, his British ally, from winning the war. Flashback to Eisenhower's emphasis on careful planning and coordination. The Germans saw it as a double-edged sword. While it ensured steady progress, it also limited flexibility and improvisation on the battlefield. Even Montgomery once said in an interview, Eisenhower had not the experience, the knowledge, the organization, or the time. Despite criticisms, Eisenhower's leadership was respected by many for its ability to maintain unity among the diverse Allied forces. There is no doubt in the fact that the diplomatic skills were crucial in managing the complex coalition. Under Eisenhower was an American general, General George S. Patton, a man both respected and feared by the German High Command. General Alfred Jodl once said about him, "He was the American Guderian." He was very bold and preferred large movements. He took big risks and won big successes. Both Patton and Eisenhower had served in the U.S. Army during World War I. They were also involved in the development of armored warfare tactics during the interwar period. As the U.S. entered into World War II, Patton commanded the 2nd Armored Division. Flashback to Operation Torch. Patton led the invasion of Casablanca. His group was called the Western Task Force. On November 8, 1942, the operation began. The night was dark and the sea was rough as the Allied forces reached the Mediterranean coast. Patton's forces faced fierce resistance from Vichy French troops. The battle was intense. Shells exploded and gunfire echoed across the beaches. Despite the chaos, Patton remained resolute. His strategy was clear. He ordered a swift and aggressive advance. Tanks rolled ashore and infantry followed. Enemy defenses crumbled under the relentless assault. Patton's men pushed forward, securing key positions. The city of Casablanca was within reach. Patton's forces tightened their grip. By November 10th, the French resistance faltered, surrounded and outgunned. They had no choice but to surrender. The city fell into Allied hands. Fast forward to 1943. The Allies invaded Sicily. Operation Husky, as it was named, was started before sunrise. This was a massive amphibious assault on the southern shores of the island. Patton commanded the U.S. 7th Army. He was the first Allied commander to reach Messina. Then he was assigned a key role in Operation Fortitude, the Allies' military deception campaign for Battle of Normandy. At the start of the Western Allied invasion of France, Patton was given the command of the 3rd Army. This army conducted highly successful rapid armored drive across France. Under his decisive leadership, they took the lead in relieving beleaguered American troops at Bastogne. During the Battle of the Bulge, his forces drove deep into Nazi Germany by the end of the war. But what made Patton so formidable? The answer lies in his aggressive tactics and initiative. The German High Command saw him as a formidable panzer general, akin to its commanders. Patton's ability to execute rapid, decisive movements impressed the German generals, and they noted his boldness and willingness to take risks. General Gunther Blumentritt remarked about him, "We regarded General Patton extremely highly as the most aggressive panzer general of the Allies. His operations impressed us enormously, probably because he came closest to our concept of the classical military commander." Even Heinz Guderian, the father of the German Blitzkrieg, held a high view of Patton. He is reported to have said, "I hear much about General Patton and he conducted a good campaign. From the standpoint of a tank specialist, I must congratulate him on the victory, since he acted as I would have done had I been in his place." Among all Allied generals, Patton stood out as the most German. He meticulously studied the early Blitzkrieg campaigns against Poland and France. Like the Wehrmacht commanders, he believed in a war of movement, swift, sharp, and furious. General Gunther Blumentritt said, "He even improved on Napoleon's basic tenet, activité, vitesse, activity, speed." Patton's famous motto was, "Always take the offensive, never dig in." He despised fixed positions. It was once reported that in Tunisia, he found slit trenches around a command post meant for air attack protection. He asked the commanding officer, Terry Allen, to show him his trench. Patton then urinated into it, saying, "There, now try to use it." Field Marshal Erich von Manstein, Germany's most skillful commander, was fond of monitoring performance closely. Patton did the same by sending his staff officers to frontline units. For Patton, war meant destroying the enemy's main force, not holding territory. His favorite tactic was to hold the enemy by the nose and kick it in the rear. In textbook terms, this meant nipping the enemy while tanks attacked the flanks. Patton saw tanks as upgraded cavalry, capable of deep penetrations to collapse enemy lines. He was a keen student of translated German military literature. He read the World War I memoirs of Hans von Seeckt, the Chief of Staff of the German 11th Army, and Adolf von Schell's battle leadership. Military historian Harry Yeide noted that Patton's command style resembled the German concept of Auftragstaktik, or mission-type orders. In German, ein Befehl, or a command, is a direct order, while ein Direktiv, or a directive, is broader and less detailed. The commander states the objective but leaves the method to his men. Patton would say, "Never tell people how to do things. Tell them what to do, and they will surprise you with their ingenuity." Regarding meddling generals, he observed, "The tactics belong to battalion commanders. If generals knew less tactics, they would interfere less." From watching movie Patton and the biography Patton, Ordeal and Triumph by Ladislas Farrago, it seems that Patton was the Allied general about whom German high command spent most of its time worrying. Farrago claims that after his campaign in Sicily, Patton was seen by the Germans as their most dangerous adversary. They watched his movements like spectators at a tennis match. But what if we told you that the Germans didn't see Patton as their greatest threat? Historian Harry Yeide notes that there is no factual basis for this claim. When Patton was criticized for slapping 2 shell soldiers in Sicily, the army sent him on a well-publicized tour around the Mediterranean. He visited Corsica, Malta, and Cairo. The aim was to disguise the transfer of the 7th Army from Sicily to England. Yet there is no evidence that German intelligence saw these visits as significant. Flashbacks to Washington's assumptions. Yeide argues that the idea of using Patton to deceive the Germans came from assumptions in Washington, not from any real German interest in Patton's activities. To the Germans, Patton was just one of many threats. But what about Patton's role in the fictional U.S. 1st Army Group in Kent? This group was meant to create the impression that the invasion would occur at Calais, not Normandy. Farrago's assertion that the Germans focused on Patton as the likely commander of the invasion force is based on a misinterpretation of a German war diary entry and a routine Air War Academy paper. Significantly, the German High Command did not identify Patton as the commander of the fake U.S. 1st Army Group until after they had already fallen for the Calais deception. Patton's presence in Kent was not the decisive factor in their miscalculation. Did the Germans really track Patton's movements as key to Allied intentions? Historian Harry Yeide states that they did not. Their intelligence efforts were more focused on figures like Montgomery and Eisenhower, who made strategic decisions. Instead, the Germans viewed Patton in the narrow context of armored commanders. They saw him as a skillful tactical commander, an executor of others' plans. What about the British? Hermann Göring, one of Hitler's closest comrades, the commander-in-chief of the Luftwaffe, was awed by the British. He said, "It makes me furious when I see the Mosquito. The British knock together a beautiful wooden aircraft, and they give it a speed which they have now increased yet again." Despite Göring's admiration, not all German generals shared his sentiments. Lions led by donkeys. This is what they said about the British soldiers. This phrase encapsulated the mixed feelings: respect for the soldiers, disdain for their generals. Hitler and his generals were similar to Napoleon and his men in this regard. Both regarded the British military as professional, disciplined, and courageous. Yet, they thought the British were inexperienced compared to them. Their tactical understanding during the Second World War was considered non-existent. They couldn't adapt to changing situations. The simplicity of British direct assaults always astonished the Germans. British tank units used to line up and charge German anti-tank defenses head-on. Without infantry support, the Germans were perplexed by such straightforward tactics, especially from the inventors of the tank. But about the British artillery, the Germans had starkly different views. They were impressed by it. It deployed 3 to 5 times faster than America. All the Allies in the West heavily depended on British artillery support. But behind every army, there lies a mastermind. In this case, it was Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, a name synonymous with strategic brilliance and unyielding determination. Winston Churchill referred to him as unbeatable and unbearable. What did the German High Command think of him? While some German commanders criticized him, most of them acknowledged his role in several victories. His meticulous planning and ability to sustain offensives were noted even by them. Flashback to Eisenhower's broad French strategy. Montgomery was one of those who opposed it and proposed a narrow French strategy instead. Even German generals appreciated his plan. Blumentritt, the wartime chief of staff for Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, wrote Rundstedt biography. He mentioned that Rundstedt saw the northern thrust as the obvious move. This endorsed Montgomery's strategy. Erwin Rommel was a skilled German field marshal. He was famously called the Desert Fox for his leadership and tactical brilliance in the North African campaign. But he was nothing in front of Montgomery. Montgomery defeated his forces in 6 key battles. Additionally, Montgomery's forces continued to defeat Rommel's armies, even after Rommel had left Africa. These included the Battle of the Mareth Line and the Battle of Wadi Akarit. These victories were significant in the overall success of the Allied campaigns in North Africa and Europe. Let's delve into some of these battles. August 1942, in the vast deserts of North Africa, the two military titans clashed. Rommel, the Desert Fox, and Montgomery, the unyielding British commander. Rommel respected Montgomery's bravery and perseverance. He knew Montgomery was acutely aware of his methods and avoided them. When they first met at Alam el-Halfa, Rommel had enough fuel to reach the Suez Canal. He had more divisions than Montgomery, with new guns and tanks. Rommel had an obvious advantage, but Montgomery totally outfoxed him. Then at El Alamein, Montgomery faced a test of his philosophy, decision in action, and calmness in crisis. Intelligence intercepts revealed Rommel's plans to withdraw the British into a mobile battle. Montgomery ordered his commanders to fight defensively, building up a material superiority, with 1,200 British tanks against Rommel's 530. By early autumn, Rommel realized the Germans must go on the defensive. He created an elaborate line, 8 kilometers deep, protected by 400,000 mines and anti-tank guns. On October 23rd, with Rommel in Germany, Montgomery unleashed a massive nighttime artillery barrage. Thousands of guns shelled the defenders as British infantry and engineers advanced into the minefields, clearing paths for tanks. For 2 days, the battle raged inconclusively. Montgomery shifted the main effort to where the Australians had hacked a salient into the German lines. On November 2nd, a renewed offensive cracked open the German defensive line. 2 weeks of grueling battle resulted in 50,000 German casualties, including 30,000 prisoners, for 13,560 British. A massive defeat for the Germans. Rommel panicked. He is reported to have said, "If I were Montgomery, we wouldn't still be here." He had beaten every other British general in the desert, but against Montgomery, nothing worked. In exasperation, Rommel sent a letter to his wife saying that he had lost the war and the Axis should soon pursue peace. In Tunisia, Rommel planned 2 attacks. He had a famous success against the Americans at Kasserine, but against Montgomery, he left 50 wrecked tanks on the battlefield for no gain. By then, Rommel's nerves were shot. He wrote to his wife, "I'm so depressed, I can hardly work." His doctor diagnosed a psychological breakdown. Rommel handed command to von Arnim and left Africa. In Normandy, Rommel and von Rundstedt begged Hitler for a meeting to explain the desperate German position. Rommel again wrote to his wife, "The situation does not improve. We must be prepared for grave events." He reminded her of a conversation after El Alamein, when he told her the war was lost and the Axis should sue for peace. Rommel knew he couldn't beat Montgomery, but that was not what Hitler wanted to hear. During the early stages of World War II, Montgomery served under another British General, Alan Brooke, a name etched in the annals of military history. As chief of the Imperial General Staff, Brooke was the strategic brain behind many of the Allies' critical decisions during this war. The evacuation at Dunkirk was his first test. The year was 1940. The German blitzkrieg seemed unstoppable. Brooke, commanding the 2nd Army Corps, faced a dire situation. Under relentless enemy fire, he orchestrated a daring retreat. Over 300,000 soldiers were saved. The Germans watched in awe. But Dunkirk was just the beginning. Brooke was appointed the chief of the Imperial General Staff. His mission: to plan and execute the grand strategies of the Allied forces. 1941, the Battle of Britain raged. Brooke fortified the home forces, preparing for a potential invasion. His foresight and planning were crucial. The skies over Britain held firm. Then came the turning point: Operation Overload, the D-Day invasion. Brooke's meticulous planning was pivotal. Every detail, every contingency considered. The fate of Europe hung in the balance. June 6, 1944. The beaches of Normandy. Allied forces stormed the shores. Brooke's strategies unfolded with precision. The liberation of Europe had begun. Throughout the Second World War, Brooke's leadership was unwavering. His legacy is etched in history. A master strategist, the man who helped to turn the tide of World War II. Brooke's diaries reveal his candid thoughts on the war and his counterparts. He was critical of some Allied strategies, but always focused on the ultimate goal: victory. But what did the German generals think of him? They respected his strategic mind and his ability to anticipate their moves. German Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt once remarked on Brooke's keen understanding of battlefield dynamics and his ability to coordinate complex operations. Brooke's respect for his adversaries was also clear. He understood the complexities of war and the formidable nature of his opponents. This respect was mutual. German generals knew that facing Brooke meant contending with a mind that could outmaneuver and outthink them at every turn. With the British holding the line, the spotlight now turned to the French generals. Among the Allies, Hitler and his generals held a surprising respect for the French. He and his generals had first-hand experience from World War I. No one fought them as fiercely as the French. History had shown the French as Germany's most dangerous nemesis. The Battle of France in May-June 1940 solidified this view. The French were a threat even without a huge numerical advantage or vast strategic depth. In contrast, the British in North Africa and the Russians were only dangerous with far more men and the ability to retreat thousands of kilometers. Racism also played a role. Despite their hatred for France, the Germans saw the French as racially close to themselves. Hitler admired the French as one of the Germanic races. He believed their racial proximity explained why the French had resisted Germany in World War I. In 1942, about the Battle of Bir Hakeim, Hitler said to his men, "You hear, gentlemen? It is a new evidence of the theses I have always defended. The French are, after us, the best soldiers in Europe. Even with its current birth rate, France will always be able to mobilize 100 divisions. After this war, we will have to find allies able to contain a country that is able of military exploits that astonish the world, like they are doing right now in Bir Hakeim." A similar sentiment echoed in Mein Kampf, Hitler's autobiography. The French forces at Bir Hakeim faced overwhelming odds. Outnumbered 10-1, their guns were outranged by German artillery. They had no air support and reinforcements were unreachable. Despite these challenges, the French held their ground. 3,700 Frenchmen held out for 16 days against the Afrika Korps and its Italian allies, who numbered 37,000. They inflicted over 3,300 casualties on the Germans and Italians. This bold stand allows the British to recover from near total defeat. Although the British suffered heavy losses at Gazala, with 50,000 out of 110,000 troops killed, wounded, or captured. The French defenses at Bir Hakeim prevented the complete annihilation of the Allied forces. Flashback to Dunkirk. The German generals were also impressed by the French defense of the port. This battle was both a defense and an evacuation. From May 26 to June 4, 1940, over 330,000 Allied troops were rescued. German Field General Georg von Küchler put it this way: "Despite our crushing numerical and material superiority, the French counterattack in several places. The French commander has skillfully put his troops and artillery in place. I'm afraid that Dunkirk will be a failure for us. Almost all the British Expeditionary Force and a large part of the 1st French Army are going to get away because some thousands of brave men block us off access to the sea. It's appalling, but that is the way it is." German Field General Walter von Reichenau was also impressed by the French defense of Dunkirk. He said, "The French troops have fought like lions." While the Germans were impressed by the French, they weren't too happy with the British. They started a propaganda saying the English are fighting to the last Frenchman. The British press took it with a pinch of salt. It highlighted the successful evacuation. For them, the Dunkirk little ships played a crucial role. These were private vessels like fishing boats and pleasure cruisers. Guided by naval craft, these small vessels moved closer to the beachfront's shallows. They acted as shuttles, lifting troops who were queuing in the water. Many soldiers waded shoulder deep in water for hours. Dunkirk's spirit is what the solidarity among the Allies in testing times at Dunkirk led to be known as. Two French generals stood out among others: General Charles de Gaulle and General Philippe Leclerc. When Germany invaded France in 1940, General Charles de Gaulle led the 4th Armored Division. On the battlefield, the German blitzkrieg was relentless. De Gaulle's tanks struck at Montcornet. Outnumbered, they faced fierce resistance. Explosions lit up the battlefield. De Gaulle's forces pushed forward, forcing German infantry to retreat. It was a temporary victory, but a glimmer of hope for France. Then, Paris fell. This happened in June in the same year. The French government sought an armistice, but de Gaulle had other plans. He refused a truce with Germany. Instead, he made a daring escape to London. There, he broadcast a call to arms. The Free French government was born. His refusal to accept the French government's surrender and his escape to London to lead the Free French forces earned him both respect and animosity from the German counterparts. They thought he was resilient and stubborn. He refused to bow down even in the face of overwhelming odds. Flash forward to North Africa. De Gaulle led the Free French forces. This was Operation Torch, and the year was 1942. Allied forces landed in Morocco and Algeria. De Gaulle's troops joined the fight. They faced the Vichy French forces. Tension was high. The battle was fierce. Yet victory was achieved thanks to de Gaulle's leadership. Then, in 1944, during the liberation of Paris, de Gaulle's forces were at the forefront. The city was in chaos. Resistance fighters had risen. De Gaulle marched into Paris. Crowds cheered. The city was liberated. De Gaulle's dream of a free France was finally realized. The German generals recognized his ability to inspire and mobilize, his persistent efforts to rally French resistance, and his strategic acumen were acknowledged by them. When de Gaulle went to Britain, defying armistice, a young officer, General Philippe Leclerc, supported him. During the Second World War, Leclerc had fought in the Battle of France. He fled Britain to join the Free French under General Charles de Gaulle. German generals had their views on Leclerc. General Heinz Guderian acknowledged his prowess. He noted the effectiveness of his rapid maneuvers. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel recognized his determination. He saw in Leclerc a formidable opponent, one who never backed down. The cities of Paris and Strasbourg owe their liberation to one man, and that was him. When the Battle of Normandy was raging in August 1944, the German forces retreated eastward, and the destiny of Paris was uncertain. American commanders, including Patton, planned to bypass Paris. Their eyes were set on Berlin, but the French saw an opportunity. Liberating Paris meant political and social victory for them. Patton's memoirs revealed the tension. He writes, "Leclerc of the 2nd French Armored Division came in, very much excited. He said, among other things, that if he were not allowed to advance on Paris, he would resign. I told him in my best French that he was a baby, and I would not have division commanders tell me where they would fight, and that anyway I had left him in the most dangerous place. We parted friends." Patton had called Leclerc's division a month early. Inspected in England, they were ready. Leclerc's fury over Paris was palpable. A French resistance messenger urged the U.S. Army to act. American Brigadier General Omar Bradley consulted General Eisenhower. The decision was made. Leclerc was given the green light, but with a warning: this could turn into a catastrophe. That evening, Leclerc gave the signal. 2 columns, 2,400 vehicles, raced 125 miles to Paris. On August 24th, the first company slipped into the city. The bells of Notre Dame began to toll. On August 25th, Leclerc set up headquarters in Gare Montparnasse. German General Dietrich von Choltitz surrendered. Paris was free at last. Now on to Strasbourg, in German-claimed Alsace. This city had been Leclerc's target since the beginning. From the African continent, French forces gathered strength. They took Kufra to Libya. There, Leclerc's men swore an oath to fight until the French flag flew over Strasbourg. On November 23, 1944, Strasbourg surrendered. Leclerc's forces were victorious. The oath was fulfilled. In April the next year, Leclerc and the 2nd Division entered Germany. They reached Hitler's eagle nest at Berchtesgaden. Thanks to Leclerc, the war in Europe ended on May 7th. As the Western Allied forces pushed forward with relentless determination in the West, another formidable power was standing in the East. The Soviet generals, with their brand of warfare, were about to change the course of history. German Field Marshal Paul Ludwig Ewald von Kleist is reported to have said, "From the very beginning, the Russians proved first-class warriors. Our successes in the first months of the war can be explained by better training. Having gained combat experience, the Russians became first-class soldiers, and they fought with exceptional perseverance and had astounding endurance." But did every German general share this view? Or did such a view last long? The answer to both these questions is a straight no. German generals seethed with hatred for their Soviet foes. Nazi propaganda fanned the flames. They branded Soviets and Slavs as Untermensch, or subhumans. The mission? Exterminate these subhumans. Carve out Lebensraum, living space, for the Aryan race. It was a clash of identities, superior versus inferior, Aryans versus non-Aryans. Communism? Hitler saw it as a deadly threat to the European culture. One example of this hatred can be seen during Operation Barbarossa. As this operation loomed, the Wehrmacht's high command issued chilling orders. Target Eastern Europe's inhabitants indiscriminately, unleashing systematic violence on entire populations. The German army was instructed to carry out the anti-Bolshevik, anti-Jewish, and anti-Slavic massacres. The German High Command issued the guideline for the conduct of the troops in Russia. These guidelines ordered German troops to target Bolsheviks, Jews, and the Slavics in general. The war in Eastern Europe was so brutal that it is often described as a historic task to liberate the German people from the Asiatic Jewish danger. About the Soviet generals, the Germans had a mixed impression. In the beginning, the Soviets' command's actions seemed mediocre and ill-planned. There was a shocking waste of resources with massive losses in infantry and equipment. Troop movements lacked logical coordination. What about their artillery? The Soviet artillery, too, didn't instill much fear in the Germans. The Russians often lacked sufficient ammunition. Their radio communication was poor, leading to uncoordinated fire. Their radio messages were also the easiest to intercept. During the early days of the Eastern Front, the German generals saw the Soviet officers as utterly incompetent. They viewed their soldiers as brave but badly led. Erich von Manstein, in his book Verlorene Siege, Lost Victories, portrayed the Soviet officers as hopelessly unskilled. He depicted the war on the Eastern Front as a German army vastly superior in fighting ability, being worn down by sheer Soviet numbers. But this view changed soon after the Battle of Stalingrad. The contempt German officers held for Soviet soldiers turned into genuine respect. During this campaign, the German High Command was taken aback by the Russians' ability to launch surprise attacks, especially at night. This war resulted in the expulsion of the Axis militaries from the Caucasus, reversing the German-led advances. General Franz Halder noted, "It seems the enemy on the initiative of a new command, and also perhaps under the influence of England, makes every effort to hold the front line and not allow us to move further east. Russian troops are fighting as before with the greatest tenacity and severity." One of the commanders of the Red Army was Marshal Georgy Zhukov. In July 1943, the largest tank battle in history erupted, the Battle of Kursk. At its heart was Zhukov. Zhukov's memoirs reveal his central role. He planned the battle. He orchestrated the offensive. Flashback to February 1941. Zhukov, chief of the General Staff, drafted a strategic plan. War with Germany loomed. June 22, 1941, Germany launched Operation Barbarossa. The Germans began invading the Soviet Union. That same day, Zhukov signed the Directive of People's Commissariat of Defense No. 3, ordering an all-out counteroffensive by Red Army forces. The directive aimed to encircle and destroy enemy groupings near Suwalki and then seize the region. But the plan failed. Disorganized Red Army units were crushed by the Wehrmacht. The Battle of Kiev erupted in September. Over 600,000 Soviet troops were captured or killed. Zhukov's standing with Joseph Stalin got lowered. In his defense, Zhukov claimed he was forced by Stalin to sign the directive. Despite his objections, Zhukov was removed as chief of the General Staff. On October 6th, he was appointed the representative of Stavka for the Reserve and Western Fronts. A few days later, these fronts were merged into the Western Front under Zhukov's command, participating in the Battle of Moscow and several battles of Rshev. In late August 1942, Zhukov was made deputy commander-in-chief and sent to the Southwestern Front to take charge of the defense of Stalingrad. A few months later, Zhukov coordinated the Western Front and the Kalinin Front during Operation Mars. Then, in January 1943, he directed the actions of the Leningrad and Volkhov fronts and the Baltic Fleet in Operation Iskra. In the same month, he was promoted to Marshal of the Soviet Union, a dramatic rise for a man once sidelined. November 16th, Zhukov commanded the 1st Belarusian Front. The Vistula Order Offensive and the Battle of Berlin became his stages. He urged his troops to remember German atrocities. In his words, "Remember our brothers and sisters, our mothers and fathers, our wives and children tortured to death by Germans. We shall exact a brutal revenge for everything." A chilling command that echoed through the ranks. The war claimed over 20 million Soviet lives. The Soviet westward advance was marked by brutality towards German civilians. Looting, burning, and systematic rapes were inflicted on them. But what drove Zhukov to such extremes? No one knows. Due to his bravery and determination, Zhukov was chosen to personally accept the German instrument of surrender in Berlin. A moment of triumph. but also a moment of reflection. What did the German generals think as they handed over fate to this formidable adversary? A question that lingers in the annals of history. Alongside Zhukov stood another Soviet titan, General Ivan Konev. Later promoted to Marshal, Konev was a force to be reckoned. Chief of the General Staff of the Soviet Union, Alexander Vasilevsky called him one of the best Soviet military leaders in World War II. He said, in perseverance and willpower, Ivan Konev was closest to Zhukov. Konev had a good intuition and skillfully combined the might of artillery and aviation with the speed, onslaught, and surprise of a strike. Konev tried to see a battlefield with his own eyes and carefully prepared each operation. German generals respected and feared him. They knew his strategic acumen. He was known for his aggressive tactics and his ability to coordinate artillery and aviation with ground assaults. German General Heinz Guderian once remarked on Konev's strategic prowess. Konev's ability to adapt and respond swiftly on the battlefield was formidable. His tactics often left us in a state of constant vigilance. But what made Konev one of the best? He was the master of disguise, maskirovka, the Russians called it. He was inspired by Sun Tzu's war philosophy, which he mentioned in The Art of War. Camouflage, dummy equipment, fake supply depots. Konev would use all. His tactics baffled the Germans. At the start of the war, Konev commanded the 19th Army, which was positioned in the western frontiers. His forces faced the brutal onslaught of the Wehrmacht. On July 12, 1941, Konev reported to the front headquarters, "I do not have a single full-blooded and combat-ready formation. I am holding the front thanks to individual organized units. For 4 days, I have had no support from our aviation. The troops are fighting hard against the ground forces." Later, he made up for that onslaught as he took command of the Kalinin Front. On December 5, 1941, his troops launched a massive counteroffensive. This drove the Germans back 150 kilometers from the capital. But the victory was short-lived. In early October, disaster struck near Vyazma. His troops suffered a terrible defeat. Over 380,000 soldiers were killed or wounded. Around 600,000 were taken prisoner. The road to Moscow lay open for the Germans. Konev faced a military tribunal. Execution loomed. His predecessor, General Dmitry Pavlov, had been shot on July 22 for a similar defeat. But fate intervened. Georgy Zhukov stepped in. Konev avoided severe punishment. He was appointed commander of the Kalinin Front. Vyazma was not his last defeat. Late 1942 and early 1943 saw more failed offensives that ended in heavy losses. But then came the Battle of Kursk in the summer of 1943. This was a turning point for Konev. The Red Army held firm against German attacks. On July 17th, Konev's steppe front went on the offensive. They pushed the enemy back. Belgorod and Kharkiv were liberated. By September's end, they reached the Dnieper. They crossed it, seized the bridgeheads, and held firm in fierce battles. Konev's brilliance shone during the Korsun-Shevchenko operation in early 1944. Alongside General Nikolai Vatutin, he encircled 59,000 enemy troops in central Ukraine. Despite some escaping, the enemy suffered up to 40,000 casualties. A German prisoner remembered, "Everything was mixed into one stream. Everyone was fleeing, and no one knew where he was fleeing and why. Broken cars, guns, carts, and hundreds of corpses of soldiers and officers were lying on the roads and off the roads." For his triumph in the Stalingrad on the Dnieper, as this battle came to be known, Konev was honored with the title of Marshal of the Soviet Union. Then, in spring 1944, the Red Army launched the Uman-Botasani operation. Konev skillfully deployed 3 tank armies. His quick reactions to battlefield changes were crucial. The Second Ukrainian Front, under his command, defeated the 8th German Army. They liberated parts of western Ukraine and Moldova. Entering Romania, they became the first Red Army troops to cross the USSR's state border. Konev himself narrowly escaped death. His car was fired upon by a German fighter while crossing the southern Bug River. From May 1944 until the war's end, Konev led the First Ukrainian Front. He defeated Army Group North Ukraine in the summer of 1944. His troops then liberated Western Poland, the first region that was occupied by Germany at the beginning of the Second World War. They seized the vital Silesian industrial region in the winter and spring of 1945. Konev's men also participated in the Berlin operation, contributing to the final defeat of Germany. But Konev was also highly despised and feared by the Germans. This was because he butchered German prisoners of war, and he even boasted about his ruthless and inhumane behaviors. In conversations with Stalin, Milovan Djilis, a famous Yugoslavian dissident, writes of Konev, "We let the Cossacks cut up as long as they wished. They even hacked off the hands of those who raised them to surrender," the marshal recounted with a smile. Don't miss out on this thrilling exploration of wartime strategy and heroism. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. Let us know, what do you think about the Allied generals? Tell us which war or event should be covered next. Subscribe to our channel, hit the notification bell, and join us as we uncover the untold stories of wars. Your journey into the past starts now.